This is Cultural Debris with host Alan Cornett.
Welcome back to Cultural Debris. I'm recording this as I'm in the midst of packing for a trip to Italy, where I will meet my Cultural Debris excursion partner Tom Ruby in Bologna at the beginning of next week. So I do confess to having multiple things on my mind. We're heading to Bologna, then on to Genoa. I will use this as a moment to let everyone know that in 2024, we will have excursions to Andalusia, Spain in March, as well as in May and October in Italy. We would love to have you go. Spots are limited, and we already have a number of commitments, so please do let us know. Please also visit culturaldebrisexcursions.com for additional information, and don't hesitate to reach out. Fall weather finally has come to the bluegrass, and I've even had a chance to pull out some cords and a jacket or two. I'm wearing a little bit of tweed right now. I haven't gone full-blown into fall yet, but I'm well on my way. We're heading into the best time of the year. I do need to order some bulbs for planting when I return from my trip. Last year I waited too late and saw many choice items sell out. I need to up my bulb game. This episode's poem won't be in the introduction as usual, so stick around for our guest. My guest is Caitlin Smith Gilson, who is a philosopher, theologian, poet, and novelist. I originally contacted her to invite her to come on to the podcast to discuss the story and movie Babette's Feast. As time went on, that topic expanded to a discussion of her book As It Is in Heaven, as well as her poetry. We have also a bonus guest, so stick around to the end, her friend and collaborator, the artist Carol Scott. This episode is probably multiple episodes in one, and it's certainly one I enjoy doing. So please join me as I talk with Caitlin Smith Gilson. Caitlin Smith Gilson, welcome to Cultural Debris.
Thank you, Alan. Delighted to be here.
Thrilled to have you. This has been an interview, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. This has been an interview that's taken us a while to get nailed down, but we finally made it, and I'm happy that we have. And it looks like you are in a lovely setting, and I think you're going to show us some of that. So those of you who are listening audio only may hop over to YouTube and see some of this, because I think we're going to have a few visuals, but our discussion will not be visually dependent. Nonetheless, it could be enhanced visually. Typically, I read a poem in my introduction to the podcast, but that seemed to me superfluous because I have a poet as a guest. So people would much rather hear from a real poet than hear me read someone else's poetry. So I am going to turn things over to you and let you share a poem with us and tell us a little bit about it, please.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. This poem was published over Holy Week on Maundy Thursday. It also resides in my new poetry book called The Angulara Decade, co-written with the artist Carol Scott. This poem is called, aptly, Maundy Thursday. My Lord, I am bathed in blood and sin. As sweetness of song transports age and neglect into undelivered age upon age, neglect me and do what you will. Ignore every half-spent, misspent thought of mine until I am yours. My Lord, I am bathed in your blood and my sin. It soaks my clothes and my hair, chills and tires me, confuses my tears, rocks me in the cradle, in the heavy down, lowered into mothering arm, held firm in the torrent of sun. Wraps me as the panting deer from the buckshot, lowered, burst lung, bleeding out. Amid the mud and dung, muddled and more to soak the ground. So much more reflected on the pavement, on the gravel and stone. Dried on the tongue in the finality to come. Lay down, helpless movement, bereft in unreflected remorse. Is this it? Is this it, my Lord? Neck to its side, unresistant as it is broken once more. One more composition redesigned to do your will. Slice my throat. Break my neck. Take your time in mine. Hand on chest, ravaged and conquered. Presses and presses of thorns into my eyes. My love of unacknowledged compassion. My love of roses overflown. I am without recourse, soaked in all blood and sin. Sinless drops of blood anoint the places of my face and chest, resting on your earth, drowsy and small. The birds round the bay tide and the faraway hills have come bid me sleep. These vacancies of my fatted heart pull down into singular beats. I tire of your love. Forgive me, I tire of good things. One beat less resistant than the next, each drawn into your languishing misery. You have come before me, and after me, and through me, beside and below me. You remain in all my nothing, of nothing words jumbled and confused. Is this it? Is this it, my Lord? I conspire in your love. Forgive me, relieve me. Break me and dip the bread into your blood. My neck is at its side, unresistant and in your care. I place my head upon your earth. Your chest seeps threefold. Your flesh grants spaces in threes. Your body weeps into me the great night which awaits all unfinished things. Who is it that has come to caress every little hold over hope and walled up innocence behind the wooden door, tucked into its frame, welded into its master lock and key? The long dressing gown that trails and weaves a thread of clay amid the upturned moonlit earth is soft to touch and weighted with centuries of threefold weeping. My Lord, I am clothed in your blood and all sin. The never before and never more undress me in their embrace, chasing me in their encasement, haunting me as prey already wounded and bloodied, my scent for the hounds, pulling my heart down into a singular echo, one chamber wall to the next, volume and percussion, every ounce of my blood. You take so little of me, my Lord. Why do you take so little of me, my lamb of all lambs? Break me and dip the bread into your blood. In the valley of misunderstanding, I lay betwixt the stars and the past, wondering at last, wondering. Is this it? Is this it, my Lord? Basta. That was it. That's the poem. It was happily published also in the Joie de Vivre Journal, which I'm very excited about as well. It's a local Southern Louisiana quarterly for Catholic arts and ideas.
I think that journal is is that where your Babette's Feast article was also published?
Yes.
So that by happenstance / providentially, that table of contents somehow ended up in my Twitter feed months ago, and I just was looking over it. I was unfamiliar with the publication and saw your essay listed about Babette's Feast. And I had wanted to talk about Babette's Feast on the podcast. And I thought, aha, I found someone who has written about it. So I knew nothing about you at the time. And so tracked you down through mild internet sleuthing and sent you an email. So that's how we got. Yeah, me too. That's how we got together. Again, this was probably back in the spring, I guess. And
I think so, right before Italy.
Yeah, and we kept trying to make things connect, but I have actually decided that all of that delay was good because I kept finding out more interesting things to talk to you about. and we had a chance to correspond here and there over the past few months, and that was enjoyable as well. So we're going to talk about various things, including Babette's feast.
Sounds great. I enjoyed your Chesterton as well. That was great.
Thank you very much. That's the Chesterton conference talk that I gave, and I probably referenced that in my introduction to this podcast. But you can also see that on YouTube. So I would encourage people to hop over there if they have an interest in Russell Kirk and G.K. Chesterton. That was a lot of fun. They were very kind to invite me to do that, and nobody walked out that I saw, so that's good. Always take that as a good sign. So, but it was a fun talk to
Kirk
do.
is such an important figure. His principles of
He
conservatism.
is, and I think is in some. He's slipping away in the public consciousness to some degree, and so we're trying to make extra efforts to remind people of all the value that's there, because there's so much, and it's I think a lot of his writing is particularly valuable today because it's such an antidote to ideology of both right and left. And to reading Kirk is a corrective to a lot of modern day thinking in categorical thinking. People get locked into ideological categories, where, of course, his idea of the way to approach conservatism or traditionalism is through a way of thinking, a cast of mind, rather than adhering to certain ideological boundaries. And I think that that's valuable in what we keep seeing as an increasingly polarized, I guess, public square, where people aren't talking to one another.
They're talking at each other,
or
each with
yelling
ideologies.
That's right.
I discuss Russell Kirk in my Subordinated Ethics book.
Oh, okay.
Rather favorably in terms of reapproaching tradition as living and not a kind of Humean stasis. You know?
Right.
So he's a good figure.
It's an organic thing. It's not meant. Kirk was very clear that we're not meant to try to freeze things in a particular time, because that's impossible.
Yes.
But that at the same time, we are not dismissive of what has gone on before. Then that's and people sometimes. I mean, I guess on the one hand, there's the nostalgia trap, and all of us have certain leanings that way. I'll confess to being guilty to that. But at the same time, there's sort of the revolution trap, which is what conservatism was really designed to stand against, going back to Burke. Yes. The year zero mentality. We're always in year zero, because what has gone on before is always found wanting, and always will be found wanting.
It's progress unhinged from a telos. It's progressivism for the sake of.
Right.
In that kind of view, it's always going to eat. It's going to consume its progenitors, and there's no stable foundation whatsoever for learning, meaning, intelligence, communication. And we're in the midst of that now. We're seeing the fallout of that, particularly in higher learning.
Right, I think so, and I don't know. Of course, at the time of our talking, there's ongoing news of different universities casting aside what I think you and I would probably consider core areas of study for a university to be even considered a university. And in some ways, I think that humanities and arts departments have brought some of that on themselves, because they've been so self-subversive to their own area of study, that they've essentially sent the message that we're not worth supporting to do this.
Right.
And I think that there's going to have to be a bit of a maybe a Phoenix type situation where there's a death and a rebirth of proper humanities in order for it to reset, and that's going to require a lot of recovery and reevaluation. And of course, there's a real problem on the right because so much of the right has become very utilitarian focused.
Yes.
And
Yes.
which undermines its own purpose for being, and a lot of people don't see that anymore. So there are many problems to fix, and they won't all ever be fixed, I suppose. But
I can tell you at my university that the loss of any integral role of the humanities theology, it's been vitiated. We have 3 different schools. One of the schools is your liberal arts. 14 professors were let go. In a Catholic institution, the entire theology department let go. History shut down. Philosophy, now no more. And it's this understanding that those classical foundations have nothing to contribute. It's not only a loss of what they are, but a willful disregard. I mean, it's an anti-intellectualism that we're confronting. So you wonder, what's going to be the state of higher education in 20 years?
It's frustrating, especially when you see that in professedly Catholic institutions, because they are literally the foundation of all higher learning.
Yeah.
And it's general. Of course, I have a history background, but it's my feeling that a university can't really be a university if it doesn't have a philosophy department. I don't see how you could even call yourself in a traditional sense, the way we've always understood a university, that you could be a university without having a philosophy. And to be a Catholic university, I feel like you are going to have theology. So
yes,
so that it is distressing.
And history. I mean, I think you cannot be a good philosopher, a good theologian, a good thinker. That was Etienne Gilson's point. You must be a good historian to be able to understand philosophy.
So the next, it's going to be a generational situation. I mean, it's going to be a century-long battle to restore a lot of these things, I think, at least.
I think so.
We are not used to thinking in those terms anymore. On the other hand, our forebears were, so we're going to have to recalibrate how we think about time and what the church does, and because it's easy to get caught up in our social media, Twitter, podcast kind of world where we think everything's immediate and everything has to operate within a television news cycle.
Yes.
And we have to get more into centuries long cathedral building kind of mentality, I think.
Yes.
So you are in New Orleans, is that right?
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about your background and about being in New Orleans. And you just recently had a workshop there, I think.
That's right. Let's see, how far do you want me to go back? To college?
Oh, as far as you feel like going back.
Okay, then we'll go as far as I feel. Let's see. I was born in San Antonio, Texas, because I'm a military family. Okay. All my family are New Yorkers, so I consider myself half and half Texan, half New York. It's probably there in the accent somewhere. I went to school at St. Francis College, Fordham, and then St. Francis College in New York City. Loved every minute of it. Took so much philosophy that I probably ended up with a degree and a half of philosophy. They had to rein me in at the end, and really the passion from the beginning. I met my husband. We have twin daughters. They're 19 years old, brilliant. Mary and Lily, just most wonderful gift anyone could have. And we ended up, when they were small, about 4 months after their baptism, I always remember this, we were rushing to get ready for Rome, get their baptism, everything else. We ended up going to Italy for my doctorate in Santa Croce, one of the pontifical universities right near Piazza Navona. And I can tell you that was the formative educational experience of my life. It was everything, Alan, you're talking about in terms of the good. I can remember the things that I point out are, you'd have these classes with in-depth discussion, dialogue, debate, and I can regularly remember going downstairs to meet my husband, and one of my priest professors would be walking and talking with me and say, the gemelli, the babies, are they here? And I said, well, they're downstairs. And the priest would get on their knees and kiss my girls, and send us off on our way. And it was this experience of love, of holiness, and of rigorous thought in a beautiful setting. And it certainly changed my life forever, and I'm grateful for it to no end. After that, I taught adjunct at St. Mary's University for a number of years, and then I was at Josephinum Seminary. I took a break to live in Malta, not just Malta, Gozo, the small island. My husband and I decided to do that, rented a little farmhouse in the middle of Victoria, or Rabat, Gozo, and I wrote a couple of books there in my book writing quest. And got to tell you, I loved Malta as well. It had that experience of rich Catholicism in terms of festival, in terms of living, vibrant, almost a kind of idiosyncratic Catholicism, in the sense of just the abundant joy. It wasn't this constant defensive, reactive Catholicism that we have in America. To put him, everything to me is integrated as being a mother. So I'm going to give you another mother example. I can remember being in a festival for Our Lady in Gozo, and the teenagers are wearing shirts of St. George or Our Lady or anything else. And some of the kids have tattoos, some don't, some have hair going up everywhere. And my girls must have been about 8 at the time. And they're watching the festival. They're watching the Madonna go down the street, all the lights, the fireworks, the teenagers excited, and turned to me and said, "Our faith is really cool, Mom." And it was, stages on life's way. That moment for them, that lived experience touched them. And I think it affected their faith the rest of their lives. So after Malta, I helped out with forming Newman College Ireland. Sadly, that program didn't survive, but I had a blast with Nick Healy Sr. Writing curriculum and trying to illuminate the faith in Ireland. And it was an inaugural year in Italy. The students absolutely loved it, and I enjoyed it immensely. And that gets me here. I lived in Anzio for a year before writing again, another book. And then got to New Orleans, and I've been here since 2016.
Oh, wonderful.
Teaching and enjoying the best life has to offer.
Well, I would think New Orleans would be, it's not Rome, but it's its own beautiful, unique setting, I would think, for study and learning and teaching.
Oh, definitely. I've met some great people. It's more of a European city. You're going to meet in a bit my dear friend Carol. We've known each other for years. She's done the cover of 2 of my books. One has a rosary, Subordinated Ethics, and one has St. Joseph's Day altar for my Heaven book. And she's my co-author for all the art and some of the poetry for the book here. So it's an experience of intelligence, education, culture. So yeah. I love it here.
Well, I mean, you're bringing together, I think, in a very valuable way, a lot of different, um, a lot of different streams of thought, a lot of different approaches. I mean, you've got philosophy, theology. I mean, we're to talk about Babette's feast, literary criticism, I guess, maybe not per se, but at least from that direction, and then also poetry. And I think that one of the important areas, or one of the important emphases that we have to have in sort of a revitalization of humane thinking, is to have this kind of cross pollination of thinking, to bring these things together in a in a way that inform each other. Not that every theologian has to be a poet, but
Mhm.
that there needs to be an appreciation for that, and it helps if some are, um, so that we can kind of bring those different ways of thinking into a connection. And in my own small way through this podcast, I'm hoping to try to do that, because I try to talk to different people from different areas, but all from a traditionalist point of view, that we're trying to get to the good and the beautiful, and that those are valuable things that we can find in different places and through different processes too.
We're reminded of Solzhenitsyn, his Nobel Prize speech, "Beauty," uh, Dostoevsky's enigmatic remark, "Beauty can save," and it
Mhm.
certainly can.
Yeah.
It's the backdrop that allows the transcendentals, the true and the good, and thus your intellectual and moral pursuits, um, have their inner dynamism to them, their eros and agape.
Yeah, and that's of course one of the big problems of modernity, is that it tends to be anti-beauty, especially
Yes.
through architecture, um, but also through modern art. There's this. It's not just simply a dismissal of beauty, but a lot of it is actively anti-beautiful. That it is it's almost seeking to combat beauty, and when that happens, it puts a veil over the divine. We're not able to see and apprehend what we ought to be able to see and apprehend. It becomes, there's more work to it, to get to it, I think.
Most definitely. So my co-writer Carol, her her big concern is that art gets reduced merely to shock value,
Right.
or to a pure nostalgia, which we can understand why we do that. But like anything, it has to live and breathe and move. I'm just going to turn for a second. This is the Passion of Our Lady that's actually in my book. She transferred it to black and white as well. And it's to me, it's fantastic. A
Hmm.
meditation on Our Lady in a unique and renewed sort of form. Um, you can see the glasses as well. Anyway, art has to it has to grow as literature, as all of our body of culture does. But we have to be
Right.
very careful to not allow it to reduce mere shock value, um,
Yeah,
reduce to the
I
ugly.
think I
And I
think that
think we're in that in lots
it's
of aspects.
easy. It's easy when we, or I guess not easy, but it's a temptation when we're faced with the hostility of the modern,
Yes.
um, to become reactionary in unhelpful ways.
Yes.
Um, I mean, I will plead guilty to being a reactionary in many ways, uh,
Hmm.
but at the same time, we have to recognize the dangers of becoming ossified. That
Yes.
uh, the the things that we look back to, the traditions that we look back to, the beautiful art, the architecture, and all of those things, were themselves in their time innovative. Um,
Hmm.
the the Gothic cathedral was an extraordinary innovation of its time, and so we can't be afraid of innovation, and we can't be afraid of the new. But as you said, what we have to be wary of is that which is untethered from untethered from tradition and untethered from the sacred. And when those things happen, bad things result. We ought to be, as a society, capable of the kind of innovation that we see in a Gothic cathedral. But who knows what that would look like, because right now I don't think we are capable of it, because we don't have the foundation for it. And that's a long act of recovery.
We're forsaking the anthropological basis that allows us to do those things.
Right.
Aquinas we can never close it off, because we can't close off being. We may be able to close our access to it. But with Aquinas, we're on the horizon between time and eternity. And rather enigmatically with your Plato in the Timaeus, in many ways we're the moving image of eternity. And it's that balance of the two that we very rarely get right.
Yes.
Very rarely.
Well, and I think it's
enter into angelism or we enter into pure carnality. But we never quite get the right pitch.
Right.
And the right texture.
And I think even at our best, there's always a bit of a pendulum swing there, just because we are fallen incarnate beings who are never going to be perfect. But we can see that in the past, they've gotten it a lot better than we have. And so we have to learn from them and imitate them without simply being copyists. And I think that's there's a challenge there, of course. But you mentioned when you were in Malta the idea of a festal Catholicism. That I'm going to use that idea to segue us into talking about Babette's feast, because
perfect segue.
I think that that notion, to me, is that it underlies the entire story. The idea of a quest for a rejection of, but then ultimately salvation through, if we want to use that strong of a term, but I think that's accurate, salvation through the festal. That to me is fundamentally Eucharistic. I mean, to me, it's just, I don't see how one can understand Babette's feast without seeing it through a Eucharistic lens. Which is interesting. I want to talk about that, and you will probably have better thoughts about that than I will. But so Babette's feast is not really that old of a story. It was written in 1958 by Isaac Denison, aka Karen Blixen, who most people probably know because of Out of Africa, I think. Probably the most famous, because of the movie, to Westerners, probably the most famous thing she did. But Babette's Feast was a short story she wrote pretty late in life. And was made into a movie in, was it 87? 87, a Danish film.
Gabriel Axel.
And if you watch it now, you'll have subtitles for it. But it's a beautiful film. It took me a long time to actually sit down and watch it, and I was just sort of blown away when I finally did. It's one of those movies that I kept reading about, so see references to, and it came out when I was a teenager, so a Danish film wasn't high on my list of to be watched movies at the time, but to a high schooler that didn't seem like a good idea. But it's really extraordinary, and of course the short story behind it is amazing as well. I have rewatched the movie more recently than I've reread the short story, but the movie is very is very faithful,
I think,
to the story. Perfect. I mean, there are some variations, but I don't think they are extraordinarily,
They don't detract.
yeah,
You know,
right,
they don't cut the heart of the story.
right. So, I'll probably, because it's fresh in my mind, I'll probably be talking more about the movie. But I do encourage people to read the short story too, and I will give the disclaimer that there will probably be spoilers in this discussion. if someone is listening who has not seen the movie or read the story, if you
Pause the
want,
podcast.
you can pause here, go read the story, watch the movie,
And
and
come back to us.
I think it's on HBO Max, and you can maybe rent it through Amazon or something.
You can rent it through Amazon.
Yeah. But I think if you have HBO Max, I think it's there too. So go do that, and then come back and listen to the rest of our discussion about this. But it really was. I mean, when I read the short story at the time, it was just, I was like, this is one of the best short stories I've ever read. I mean, it's just
Perfect.
so moving, and every time I watch the movie, you know, the tears start forming at the end, and because it's just it's so pitch perfect, I think, um, with how she develops everything. So I'm going to ask you, if you will, to give us a little brief summary of the story, and then you and I can talk about it some.
Okay. Alan, I'm going to take a little liberty to give you a background in my life in terms
Please
of
do.
the movie. My first time that I watched the movie, I must have been about 9. My grandmother and I had gone to Sunday Mass, and the church had one of those little parish where you can get a book or get a video. And she picked that out. And I can remember us going to the grocery store, getting something for dinner. I think it was steaks. I can remember that. And we cuddled up and we watched that. And I remembered surprisingly a lot of it. But what struck me more than anything, it was the first time in my life that I can remember being struck by beauty, by being struck by something. And I read the short story in college, and I watched the movie again. And so years later, when Joie de Vivre asked me to write something on it, I jumped at the chance, because it's been there, a kind of loving, haunting presence, my entire life, as this is beauty. This is what it is, unmistakably so. You can't describe it. Watch that. That's what it is.
Yeah.
In terms of the summary of both the short story and the movie, you have two beautiful, beautiful sisters. We find out they're going to be spinsters. Martina and Philippa.
Martina and Philippa. Yeah.
And they are, everyone looks at them and longs, because their beauty is not just earthly. There's something of an angelic quality. You get the sense, particularly in the short story, this is the estuary of Eros and Agape. Whether the persons can articulate it or not, it's right there in those two figures. But they are devoted to their pastor father, and the church is a very stern community in Jutland. And the imagery, don't you think, Alan, that the imagery of the island, the barren blowing wind, lack of trees, the cold, I think is a perfect catalyst and perfect background for everything that happens in the story.
Yeah, the severity of the landscape and the climate, it's a perfect reflection of their religious sensibilities. So their father's kind of a charismatic, and I don't mean charismatic in the sense of
Pauline
American
No.
charismatics, but he is a personally charismatic individual, even though he himself is quite stern. But he builds this kind of church around his own personality, really. But he's sort of a very stern Calvinist, Puritan type religion.
an asceticism, a self-abnegation, in which there's no other side to it but that. And so the landscape reflects that perfectly. Absolutely. And both sisters have suitors. Right? There's Akil Papin. I'm trying to remember the names. He's the great opera singer, and he falls head over heels with Philippa. Right? Was it Philippa? I'm trying to recall the names.
I think that's right. Yeah, I've got.
Okay.
Check my notes here.
People watching the podcast, don't quote me on it's one of the sisters. Okay. Falls head over heels. The father permits there to be music lessons between the two.
Yes.
But there's a closeness, and the moment that he expresses to her, I love you. I can take you to Paris. You can have the world. Your world can be an oyster. Everything can be yours. She retracts and cuts off right then and there. And he's devastated, heartbroken, but he goes back to his world, and he goes back to his decadence and life of comfort and Paris and praise. And we'll get back to that in a second. We have the other suitor, the General Lawrence, who falls in love with Martina. And he is willing to give up everything for her. But again, she retracts. And that's that. He goes off and he becomes a noted general, respected, admired, loved, marries someone else, seems to have a happy life. But part of the story is about anamnesis, our sense of recollection. And we don't just mean a recalling, in the regular sense of the word, but an intensifying bringing back of the past, raking over. And all four, so the two sisters and the two suitors, do question whether their choices were the best. In my article, one of the threshold points that I see is the supernatural ingratitude of the human soul. And that's a bit of a paraphrase from Francois Mauriac, who talks about that there's something within the human heart in which our ingratitude is not only on a natural level, but it rises above that. And we do everything possible. And going back to what Alan said at the beginning of the podcast in terms of fallenness, what I was talking about in terms of time and eternity, we can never quite find the right pitch. We can never quite get it. But when we do, it shakes us. That's what the movie did for me. At that point, the author, the director, at that point, you got it right. That's it.
Right, yes.
That's what I see in Carol's art. She gets at a certain point, that's it, and you got it. And you don't really have the words for it, but you know it. Mm-hmm. And so the whole movie for me is really this sense of the supernatural ingratitude of the human soul. And each of our characters has an experience of that, except our one character, our titular character, Babette. So at a certain point, the congregation is aging. They hold hands, saying prayers one moment, yet they're talking against each other another, gossiping. Insignificant fights have festered over that. It's a community that's in decline. It's withering away. And it turns out it's the 100th anniversary of the founding.
Right, it's the 100th anniversary of his birth, I think, of the birth of their father, the girl's father. Yeah. He passes away, and they essentially inherit the responsibility of keeping the community, which is what he foresaw and why he essentially kept them from pursuing
anything else.
Anything else. He kept them as he selfishly kept them as his assistants.
Yeah.
And then
they fed and clothed
and
cared for all
in that life, even though they see it very much as their duty to carry it out. And so they help maintain the community. But like you say, there's no new blood in the community. It's just it's this ossified group who are just getting older, and as they get older, they become more and more. The community is really starting to disintegrate.
Yeah.
because of these different feuds, like you talk about, because they keep bringing up these slights and betrayals and so forth that they've experienced over the years that have never been resolved and that are just festering beneath the surface.
And you realize that, much as you were saying, the father, the shadow of the father, the faith of that community is very much a faith on the cult of his personality.
Right.
So it's a step back from a direct Christianity. You have that figure as more central even than Christ, I think. Could be wrong, but I think that's
No,
there.
I think that's right, because he is always the person really referenced. I mean, it's obviously a
What he
Christian
wants.
community, and they talk about that explicitly. But at the same time, he is the founder, and he is the one. He's really the binding force. But the further they get away from him, the girls, and now at this point older women, are unable to serve in quite the same way. I mean, in many ways, they're probably much more useful than he was. But on the other hand, they're not able. They are only able to kind of appeal to his presence, as you say, this sort of shadowy presence, in an effort to maintain the community. We will do as he has instructed us to do, kind of thing.
His prayers, how he designed it.
Right.
So we have to go back a little bit in the narrative. Years later, women are around middle age. They get a knock on the door. This is during times of war. There's upheaval in France, and Akil Papin sends a friend to them for refuge. She's lost her husband. She's lost her son. She's a widow. She has no money. And asks the women to take care of her. She says, "I will work. I don't need any money. All I need is to work. I will cook for you. I will clean. I will do any kind of odd job as long as I have a roof over my head." And that's our character, Babette. And we realize right away that she's special, that there's something unique. We see it in the community when the aged members are excited when she comes with food, that it's a little bit better. Her presence is a little bit nicer. I mean, everything about her beckons them.
Right.
You want to continue, Alan? You tell us from there?
Yeah, her presence immediately brings, not that it solidifies the community to what it was, but it brings a renewed vigor, and not just a renewed vigor, but I think new elements that they've not experienced before. And so one of the, is it fish stew that they have is their kind of their basic. I mean, and of course, it's just this sort of sludge type thing that the sisters make. It's bread. It's like stale bread and fish made into a stew is kind of, and they essentially serve as, for all these elderly people, they're bringing them food every day. They're sort of a, Meals on Wheels kind of kind of situation. But when Babette comes, she takes the same ingredients and suddenly it's different.
She's foraging in the hills for little spices and things, and somehow,
right. She's bringing something new and making what before was just a food of sustenance, just getting through the day, kind of just basic, unappetizing kind of thing, into something that they look forward to, something they're excited to have. And but that's just, of course, literally a foretaste of what we're going to see, because she doesn't transform the community at that point. I mean, it still operates on a surface level essentially like it was, but there's this added element that's bringing something new into it.
There's that hint, that sense. I mean, this could be a bit of a stretch, but when the scene with the soup and they're perking up, I'm a bit of the smells and bells girl with mass. But when you have the smell of the incense, or the mass has already long since died, so to speak, it's done, but you've entered into the church and you can still get a sense of that, the perfume of Christ.
Right.
And I think that's how the image was for me. Was the slight hint, perfume of Christ coming. And you have that comedic scene where I think she had to go to get ingredients. So she's going to be gone for a number of days. We'll talk about that in a second. But the women resume cooking.
Right.
All the people on the Meals and Wheels, just their faces.
Yeah,
There's no
they're just,
perfume, so to
just
speak.
it's sludge once again.
It's
But
back to sludge after 30 years. It's back to sludge.
so one of
But
the things, the transformative element happens when she has been playing through proxies. She's been playing the lottery in Paris, and she pays whatever the fee is through, I guess, through the post, and she receives word that she wins the lottery, and it's a significant amount of money. And so the ladies are devastated because they know that this means she's going to leave them, because she has this, she now has an independent income that she can operate without them, and they may perhaps return to Paris or do whatever she wants, because it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and especially from their point of view.
And it's that question of giving, and we see that in Scripture. The most beautiful giving, the most perfect giving, is the things that you need the most, the things that you cherish the most. If you're giving something that you don't need, that's a good thing. But when you give the thing you love, there's something very Christ-like about that. When you give the thing you love.
And so that's what she does. She asks them as a gift before she leaves or does whatever. She never says she's going to leave, but she just simply asks them, I would like, because they're having this anniversary celebration. I mean, it's as celebratory as they get, but I guess a recognition, an acknowledgement of the 100th birthday of the founder, their father.
Right.
She proposes and asks permission to prepare them a meal of her own design. That I will make a meal for the community, but I get to do it. And they are at first resistant to that, but then she says, I have never asked.
Even having dreams that it's the stuff of stuff of the devil.
Correct.
What is she going to do?
Yeah, they're very, because they are very fearful of the unknown. Yes. But she says, I have never asked you for anything. I've never asked you a favor, and they feel they can't refuse it.
And your stress on her asking permission, I mean, that the whole thing is an allegory for passion, for resurrection, that humbling that she does. I mean, she could have walked in and said, I was this fantastic chef in Paris. Everyone was at my feet. I deserve this, this, and that. Never says it. We learn only through back channels who she was. And it begins with that moment of humility. May I make you a dinner? The dinner of all dinners.
Right. And
wouldn't you love to have that dinner?
Well, I would. And apparently, I think I may have mentioned this to you in one of our email exchanges, but apparently last year there was a restaurant in New York that prepared the dinner. That you and there's a Twitter mutual of mine who went and had it, and I would that would be a dinner to have, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. The next time it's up, you got to let me know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But they acquiesce to let her do this dinner, and it's so elaborate that she has to have ingredients that are not possible to get there. And so she has her nephew, so a relative of some sort, who um, who acquires and brings these to her. She has to go away for a while to get those to get the ingredients for this dinner. And the sisters are very fearful. As you said, they have these nightmares about what this dinner could be. They see it as a possible pagan, satanic almost dinner they're afraid of, and so they make an agreement among the community that they're going to eat the dinner, but none of them will acknowledge any sensory pleasure from it.
Yes.
They vow that no matter what happens, that they are just going to eat it in a polite way, but they're not going to acknowledge any kind of carnal pleasure from the consumption of this meal.
Right. They'll do that out of kindness to Babette, because they don't want to hurt her feelings, but somehow they'll be able to have the food and not be affected by it.
Right. Yes. And so you have then brought together this, what turns out to be, as you said, a meal of a lifetime, an extraordinary banquet,
Alan, do you remember
feast?
Do you remember when all the ingredients arrive?
Yes.
Like some kind of ark on the coastline in Jutland, and you can see the little tortoise head. You know, the tortoise's head sticking out, and I love that. It's one of my favorite.
She's bringing in ingredients that they literally have never seen before or heard of, including this live turtle that she's going to make soup from. It's still alive and kind of, but it's a giant turtle. But the scene, it's this menagerie of ingredients, and so you have this on the one hand, this very the embodiment, the incarnation of this sort of this holy banquet, essentially. This self-sacrificial banquet, as we are to learn. And on the other hand, you have this very ascetic, essentially sort of Protestant anti-incarnational sort of that, the things, it's essentially sort of a Gnostic understanding of the carnal. The carnality is bad, and we must reject any kind of carnal pleasure, but at the same time, their own carnality is breaking down the community because of these. I mean, they're shunning the visible signs of this carnality through pleasure, but at the same time, they are essentially embracing the carnality of division and discord, which is building up in the community.
They're embracing the false substitutes and surrogates for a genuinely good carnality.
Right. And so, as it happens, the general, the old suitor, happens to be visiting his aunt, who is a member of the community, an elderly member of the community. So he becomes a last-minute addition to the banquet. So all
which makes for the humorous scene. Which makes for the humorous scene when the congregation is trying to withhold from having any sensory delight, and he keeps looking around. This tastes just like it did in Paris in such and such a year.
Right?
Are you tasting this? Are you having this?
Because he's not in on that. He has no idea about their vow, and he's simply there to enjoy the meal. And I'm sure, and his expectation is probably that it's going to be just simply a pedestrian kind of, the best they can do kind of meal, because he has no idea about Babette or who she is. And course after course comes out, and he has dined at the court of the king and at the best restaurants of Paris, and this is the most astonishing meal he's ever had. And she's brought in all of the different wines and champagnes, and he is astonished that no one else will acknowledge this meal, and he keeps asking them, and they just sort of politely, or not in almost a non sequitur, give him these sort of odd answers to to what he's saying. But as the meal goes on, the meal and the spirits that they are served begin to have a transformative impact
And they
on
know. Yeah.
on the congregants.
A beautiful sense of grace there that they cannot help. Just if there's just a little bit of the door ajar, and it is in their souls, they can't help but transform them.
Because
always think. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, because they are, I mean, they refuse to, they go in refusing to acknowledge the feast, but they are partaking of it. And the very act of partaking of it is enough for the foot to get in the door.
Exactly.
And then they are, as it were, supernaturally transformed by that.
I had once asked a friend, and this has stuck with me for years. If you couldn't be a Catholic, what would you be? Nothing. I'd be an atheist. And I thought it was hyperbole. Because if you knew the person, such and such is filled with hyperbole, lovely hyperbole. But he was dead serious, and he went on to explain. It's the sacrifice of the Mass. I don't want grape juice. I don't want symbol. There's symbol everywhere. I can look around at walls and see symbols of love or symbols of fidelity or this or that. I want the sacrifice. And when you watch the movie and that moment when their guards begin to break down and grace enters in, the beauty of it is that it's such a subtle, it's not in your face, it's such a subtle sense of that, of the all or nothing, of the presence. It reminds me of, well, you're going to meet her in a second, Carol, when she talks about the faith. It's the Mass, it's the sacrifice. That's everything. That's the difference. Yeah. The perfume of the soul at that point.
Yeah, and as you say, the grace starts to enter in slowly, and those bitter disagreements that they had before, they begin to bring up again, but not in a condemnatory way, now in a forgiving way, in a dismissive way, that the meal doesn't cause them to start sweeping under the rug all of these past issues that they've had, but rather to reconcile and to and it brings in forgiveness and, as you said, grace to the community, because that's what they've been lacking in all of this, very dedicated service to God in their community. They've not had grace and forgiveness, and that's why the community has started to break apart.
The meal gives them the eyes to see it as it is.
Right, and the meal brings them together. It's they're brought together around the table, and they are transformed by the consumption of the meal, and are unable to help being transformed by it. And then, of course, when all is done, and then, of course, in the movie, there's a beautiful scene where the snow and so forth. But the sisters go, and I guess in a sense this is the big spoiler, but so this is crucial to the whole movie, literally. But the sisters go to see Babette in the back in the kitchen and say, well, I guess this is it, that you're going to leave us now. And her response to them is what?
The response is that if you have me, keep me, because I've spent everything. I've spent the entire award, all of the lottery, on this dinner. That's what this dinner costs in France, in Paris, when I was head chef.
Yeah.
So I'm back to where I was before. But they're not. They've utterly been transformed. I love.
So she's given all of herself to essentially to redeem that community.
She's given the best gift she could, the most perfect.
Yeah. So it is a wonderful movie, wonderful story, and
an artist is never poor. That's one of my favorite lines at the end.
Yeah. And so you have in all of, as you talked about at the beginning, you have in with all of these individuals, you have these alternative paths, these paths that we might say would have been better to have gone down, but that they didn't. It's either through choice or through circumstance. They are where they are. And so the question there is, what do they do with that? Through choice or through circumstance, we are where we are. So what do we do with that? And the answer, of course, ultimately is, a sacrifice and this, what is it? Essentially a Eucharistic meal that brings, so it's sacrifice and grace ultimately, that is able to power everyone through, even despite wrong or different choices than perhaps they could or should have made. It still brings them to a place that they couldn't have been before. And of course, ultimately, that's the point. It's interesting to me, of course, that to my understanding, that Karen Blixen was not Catholic. So it's a very, because it seems to me to be a fundamentally Catholic message.
Yes.
And she clearly casts this kind of the strain of puritanical Protestantism against Catholicism. I mean, the Papin is explicitly identified as a Catholic. Babette obviously would be, because she's French. Although it's not made clear that either of them are particularly religious, but they're both papists. And so she makes these differences explicit in the story, so it's not an accidental element. It's not something imported in, but it's interesting that she herself would make the distinction, I think.
Right. And just the uniqueness of the sacrifice as well, if we want to go back to that. It's utter loss and total gain. And that's at the very essence of the Catholic Mass and of the Catholic sacrifice. It's utter stripping away. She's losing everything, and yet it's done with such joy, and such audacious hope of gain. And I don't think you write that by accident. There's an intentional sense of Catholicism.
I think that's right. I don't see any way that everything she's put together is done so with great intention and forethought. I mean, it's to me too exacting for it not to be. Perfect. So it and I don't know what her thinking was in general around those things, but it's clear through the story that she understood it in a way that certainly a lot of Catholics don't understand it, I think. And it's quite profound. And I mean, I would encourage anyone, whether Catholic or not, to read the story and or watch the movie. But both the story, it is a short story. It's not a hard to read. It's not a difficult to read story at all. But of course, but the movie, you have the added benefit of shot so beautifully and done so well. I would love to go on talking about this, but you and I don't have a huge amount of time. So we have two more things to talk about.
We're going to continue for 4 more hours, guys.
That's
I would
right.
say one more thing. It's
Please.
a story that when I've had students interested in Catholicism, considering to become a convert, it's one of the first things I give them to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Counterintuitively, perhaps, but you think this book, that book. It's a good start, and I think because it brings beauty, and it has the perfect calibration of the sacrifice, which is why you're converting at its heart and core.
Right, and as you pointed out, it's not a sacrifice that is done by drawing attention to itself. Mm-hmm. She asks permission for it. She asks permission, but she also asserts herself in doing it in that I very much want to do this for you. And then she doesn't, they only learn of the extent of the sacrifice by asking her, or at least really by expressing their own assumptions that she is going to abandon them from their perspective. Mm-hmm. Of course, her entire being there, in a sense, is a sacrifice.
Exactly.
Although they themselves have welcomed her in and gave her a place to be, because she was essentially a refugee from war-torn Paris, where she lost her family, by the way, which is an element. They don't go into that, but she is fleeing from the death of her family, and Papin has saw that as a place where she could go in exile and be safe.
And you think all of that heartache she carried quietly,
right.
And that has somehow sublated, merged, commingled with the cooking of the dinner. Right. She's a mother. I mean, to have loved the community the way she did, the movie doesn't reflect on the loss of the husband and the son, but we can think if she makes a meal like that and serves like that, she must have been a wonderful mother and a wonderful wife.
Certainly.
All of that's fed in there quietly.
I have beside of me this book.
Ooh. As it is in heaven.
Yes. Some Christian questions on the nature of paradise. And I do want to talk about it some. Did it come out last year?
I lost track. I think yes. Whip and Stop Cascade. Great publishers. Love them.
And you can find it wherever fine books are sold.
Absolutely. That has Carol's cover on it, one of my favorite, her St. Joseph's Day altar.
And I will have a link to the book in show notes, but if you're looking on YouTube, obviously you are seeing me hold it up in front of the camera here. I don't know, is it maybe backwards? But
and it goes beautifully with Babette and the festival.
It is a beautiful cover, and what we have on the cover, speaking of segues, is a great banquet.
Yes.
We have a feast. We've been talking about feasts. So we have a feast on the cover, and this is an exploration of, well, as your subtitle is, some Christian questions on the nature of paradise. And I don't want to dwell on this because I know that it's a painful topic for you, would have to be, but this was born out of your own grief from the loss of your niece, and understandable contemplation on that. And tell me a little bit about, to the degree that you feel comfortable, about this book and what it came out of.
Well, my niece Daisy, my daughter's age, so the three of them were best friends, thick as thieves. Very close to her, loved her as my own, absolutely. She decided one night to go out, as teenagers do, as kids do, to take her new skateboard that she had just gotten for her birthday And it was late because of mail and COVID. So she died 4 days after her birthday on the 29th of April. Went out late and crossed a street, and she didn't have the light and got hit. And it was the experience of when the family woke up and where's Daisy, and everyone's calling everyone. And she didn't have her phone on her. She didn't have things to be able to contact easily, so everyone is searching. And I can remember when I received the news from my brother that I had never had this experience before, that my whole being wailed. There's no words. We both wailed on the phone like animals being pulled apart at the seam. And I think it was that wailing at that point that got me thinking. Not immediately, but over time. My father was also protracted dying in home hospice, living with us at the time. So I was surrounded by shocking death and slow, measured death. And my dad's death, or his dying, was one of, he's ready to take a trip. He's ready to do this. I'm not dying, as he's down to 115 pounds. He's not dying. So the process of being there, holding his hand, playing music, having the priest there, all the things to be there for his death and his to the end, his refusal to accept it. He fought to the end. So it's these two intensified experiences, and really, as a mother, the grief of my daughters and my helplessness. Just wanting to, when the toy breaks, you pick it up and it's repaired. And there was nothing I could do. And there's this radical spiritual impotence, that you are powerless and you're watching the most beloved of your life in heartache. And I remember hearing someone say to me, and with all good intentions, well, she's in a better place. And I remember writing, one of my favorite living thinkers is Cyril O'Regan. And I consider him a mentor and dear friend and infinitely wiser than I am on things. And I remember writing him and saying, I feel so guilty because I have this idea of a book and it's born out of such grief that I don't feel like I should write it, because it feels like I'm benefiting or learning from all of that. And he wrote me a Cyril O'Regan letter. I don't know how else to say it, but it was 4 or 5 pages, beautifully expressed, where he encouraged me to write. And so I did. And it really is on that notion that when we say better place, oftentimes we let in a kind of latent Cartesianism. We are the unity of soul and body. And when I close my eyes and I think of heaven, the disembodied state is not enticing. And so the language of the better place, of this kind of vacant spirituality, and as you know, we separate soul and body not because of it being, primally natural, but it's the result of the fall. That's why you hope for the resurrection. It can enter into our mindset that it's a fable, it's a fantasy, or with Nietzsche, it's not good enough to be true. Because we want a heaven where touch does cross boundaries, where there's almost a synesthesia of senses and spirituality and community, as we see in the City of God. So the whole book is a dwelling on a recovery of an authentic, phenomenologically grounded understanding of paradise, the hope for it. I have to be very cautious in the book because, again, you're speaking of a subject matter we do not yet, hope to God I do someday, have firsthand knowledge. So it's the spectator on the outside looking in, prescinding, wondering, what would this be? And the exciting news, I had a conversation with my publisher last week about the poetry book, other things, is that one of the things he's encouraging me to write is a lay version of it. I'm going to call it All This in Heaven Too. So I'm in the process of writing that with his guidance. Michael Thompson, thank you so much. And also concurrently a novel on purgatory. So the plan is to have them come out together. So that it reaches a wider audience. We'll also have art.
That sounds like a future podcast discussion. We'll have to.
Oh, definitely, definitely. But the book is near and dear to me. It when you write philosophy and theology, there's always a distance. This book abolished so much distance, and having to retain and recover the distance needed to write an analytic monograph was a struggle, but a fruitful one, and it was an experience of grace for me, I think.
You quote and echo C.S. Lewis and his own writings on grief.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that struck me was you make the point that we can't ever fully recover the things that we lose. That it's that whatever the recovery is, it's not going to be the same.
It's going to be on a different plane. Recovery doesn't work. Faith is not magic.
Right. And so, we are left, I think, Scripture is vague, I guess. It is from our point of view maybe unsatisfying on its discussion of what the next life will be. It gives us tantalizing clues. I've long tended to think that one of the reasons that it's vague is because there's a point to which we literally can't understand it, because we're going to be operating on a different plane in the very presence of the divine, and that's not something that we in our infinite fallen state can even. We can't reach the level of that.
Especially not with subject-object knowledge. That's why the end is love. There has to be an overcoming of that gulf. In terms of salvation, in a sense, working as a spiral, you're not recovering exactly what you lost, is respecting the structural reality and oftentimes heartbreaking of free will. If we're getting back the same way, you're making a kind of foolish utopia, a fool's paradise. It is a recovery, I think, and a deepening beyond our wildest dreams. But as C.S. Lewis remarks in somewhere, I think in Grief Observed, who are we to think that the child who died, the mother somehow is able to bathe the child again, do the first steps again, all the things that are missed. Well, in the chance and risk of the collision between fate and free will, that's gone. And we mourn because that's gone. So you think of the babies aborted. Those lives, something has happened and that is gone. Faith is not magic. It's not just recovered in the same way. Otherwise, that alleviates the magnitude and the mystery of freedom. That while we are finite beings, we have the appetite of transcendence, which means we can make choices that play the game of the absolute.
Yeah, I always remember that the resurrected Jesus maintained his wounds, right? He's
St. Thomas speaks of that.
Yeah, he has overcome death, and yet he has, because of the incarnation, accepted essentially eternal wounds from that. And so there are going to be eternal wounds that we bear, I think. Yes. But at the same time, there is going to be a recovery beyond what we can imagine.
Absolutely.
My personal reference point for this, and it's not a work of theology per se, but it speaks to me and has and moved me in a way similarly to Babette's Feast, is Tolkien's Leaf by Niggle, which I read actually initially because I had never read it, but Russell Kirk, when in the time leading up to his death, one of the works, and Bradley Berzer talks about this in his biography of Dr. Kirk, one of the works that he reminded his children to read was Leaf by Niggle. And I thought, I've read Tolkien, but I've never read that. And so I and it's just one of those stories that just, at least to me, really spoke to me, because we always have these feelings of incompletion, right? Necessarily, we have feelings of incompletion. And yet he finds himself in this purgatorial experience where, even though he is not even conscious of it, these things that he began are completed in a way that he never could have completed them even at his best in in his life on earth. So I don't know, you have these competing I guess these competing ideas, this tension between a fulfillment that we cannot imagine, while at the same time maintaining a loss and a wound that we can't get rid of.
Yes.
So
I think
I shall turn that to you and let you speak to that, because that's deeper waters than I can even handle.
I actually discuss Aquinas's article on Christ rising with his wounds, and I use that as a the foundation point for that notion. Because the objector says, I mean, if this is your perfected state, why is Christ rising with his wounds? And St. Thomas does a fantastic intellectual dance to articulate how what was once lacking through grace is now the openings of transcendence, and even speaks rather beautifully about the wounds now are the places where we can hide in. And through that, literally, in the wounds of Christ, we resurrect. And so he rises with his scars precisely for that reason. But, when we look at the therapeutic culture that we're in, there is this obsessional need with avoiding any sort of pain, obsessional need with avoiding any discussion of death. It almost demand that we sequester that idea out of existence. And when that happens, as you said, you're producing more pain, more suffering, more confusion, more loss. And when you do go through the process of a loss, of a grief, while that wasn't supposed to be the original plan, that wasn't supposed to happen, we weren't supposed to die, nevertheless, we learn, we grow, we deepen, something changes and transforms within us. So it's not a vitiating loss anymore. It's a lacking that now is gained. Because what is the heart of Christianity but its paradoxical structure? Fully God, fully man, full time and eternity, immanence and transcendence. All of those poles are being pulled together. And I think loss and gain are at the very heart of a heaven that accommodates that we recover from a state we couldn't have recovered without Christ. And so it's not a magical heaven. It's a heaven that accommodates that when we fall, as C.S. Lewis remarks in Problem of Pain, we become like unto a new species. If we were the same as we were when we were like unto Adam and Eve, we'd say, we just got to go back up this way to get there. We know we've fallen, but we're so east of Eden, so to speak, we don't know how to get back. So the paradise that we hope God has created for us, and hope beyond all our hoping, is taking on redemptive nature. It's taking on what we pull out of fallen nature and of the original. It's a new creation.
And of course, we have the understanding that as terrible as the fall was, that as a result of that, through the redemptive work of Christ, we have something far better. That he doesn't. It's not simply a restoration to a pre-fallen state, but it is an elevation to something that is even beyond that. Yet it doesn't simply erase what we have experienced in our fallen state, but elevates us beyond it.
And remember what you were talking about early in terms of ideological thinking. The misplaced understanding of heaven is this false understanding of reverting back, going back to something. And we see that in the terrors of the 20th century. Marxism, Nazism, all of it is this some kind, we can make somehow immanentize transcendence, as Vergoen talks about, and make some ideal state. It's a misplaced understanding of paradise run amok. So the language, the problem of the question of paradise, as I state in the book, is in everything, because our anthropology is at root. Am I a natural being to a natural end, or am I a naturally supernatural being? And is my anthropology bound up in the paradisal question or not? And in its substitute and dangerous fallen form, we see that in the ideologies of the 20th century, is that the anthropology of human nature attempts to manage its own paradise and makes hell.
Caitlin, I would love to continue talking about that, but we have something else to talk about.
We do. Okay.
So
excellent.
I will again plug your book, As It Is in Heaven, and it sounds like you and I will revisit this question with even more added content at a future date.
I would be delighted.
But you also have in the works right now a new book of poetry. So I'm going to ask you to read another poem for us, and then I want you to tell me about your new project. And I believe you have a special guest, perhaps.
We do. You want to come on over, or do you want me to pan over? I'll pan over. I'll come to you. I can carry the laptop, I think, right?
Oh, sure.
Can I trespass on your time and read two? One is a joint poem and one is a singular. Yeah. We'll go with the joint first.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project first. So as I told you, I've lost my job with a number of other persons in terms of the ideological remodeling of schools. And I have a number of projects I have to complete, books, articles, everything else. And I found myself unable to write. You're dealing with lawyers, jobs, life intervenes, and you don't have that space. I have a grant to go to Italy, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to use it this summer and enjoy myself and take a couple of colleagues and a couple of students and make lemonade out of lemons. And that's effectively what happened. And I began writing a series of poems. Now I had written before. There's another volume of poetry called Tregenna Hill that was published about 2-3 years ago. But during this time, I was corresponding with my dear friend, Carol Scott. She's a noted artist, professor emeritus at Holy Cross, cover artist for 2 of my books. And I was looking at a number of her artworks, particularly her Rosary, her Fisher of Men, the one right here, her Passion of Our Lady. And I found myself writing poetry, intensively meditating on the image. So it's not poetry to an out there other. It's poetry to a specific beauty, a specific presence. And the project began to grow as projects do. And it turned into what I call a decade. So it's angular, decade, rhapsody, and redolence. And the decade is a direct reference to Our Lady, as in the Rosary. And so there are 10 sections, and the sections are God, sex, surrender, death, time, art, prayer, love, rosary, suffering, and just because we wanted to give an extra, there's a lagniappe section, which is a word in our New Orleans language for, hey, a little bit of extra, a baker's
Right.
dozen. So there's these 10 sections, and the poetry, it by design, a combination, like anything, it's a combination of luck, happenstance, and by design, by hopefully, knock on wood, a little brilliant design, but a lot of luck, the poems began to fall into those categories. During this process, as I'm writing the artist, Carol, about her pieces, as she's making a few of them, 2 of them are actually images of me that she painted. So it was, I'm creating and being created and responding to being created. So it's this Levinas gaze of the other that's beginning to happen, that we end up writing poetry together. And so the book also has joint poems in it as well. So it's a combination of a philosophical discussion of the gaze, and particularly of, I needed to recover my philosophical habitus. The gates had been blown. And philosophy requires this step back. Poetry requires a non-mediated step in. But the only way that you can step back in philosophy is that you have already stepped in. You're already in the presence. You're in the Heraclitean water that you can't step into twice. And so you do that, then you can come back and be Parmenides and see the eternal form. But life and time and grief and everything else we've talked about, the salt had lost its savor, and I had lost philosophy. So this book had recovered that. As I was telling my publisher the other day, I am ready to write. I'm ready to write heaven. I'm ready to write this and that. I'm back. I'm back, baby, as Seinfeld says, right? But I'd like to read 2 poems if possible. But if one's going to go in, let's go with Requiem, which is a joint poem with Carol. And before I read it, let me just, so you can put a face to a name, okay? Okay. You ready? Okay. So we've got some art here that goes in. What I want to show you more than anything else is this. This is mine. This is my cover for my subordinated ethics. It's my rosary. This is her rosary she got for her communion. And she painted it, and I absolutely love it, with a Baroque image. And coming on over. And these are some of the black and white. We are having an art exhibit in New York. She took the art and put it into black and white form. You can see the rose that's in color and the rosary in black. And that's me. And we call that she calls that Saint Teresa. So I was her own Saint Teresa in ecstasy. Alan, I'd like to introduce you to my dear friend, former colleague, Professor Emeritus, award-winning artist internationally and nationally, Professor Carol Scott.
Oh, wonderful.
Cover artist for Subordinated Ethics and for As It Is in Heaven, co-author and artist of 25 images plus cover for our poetry book.
Wonderful.
That's been accepted by Cascade Publishing. So.
Well, I look forward to seeing it. I have seen the images that Caitlin just showed, and she also sent me some earlier that I looked at, and they're beautiful, beautiful images. And my understanding is you all are going to be, you're going to have an exhibit for those as well?
Yes, in New York, we're going to have an exhibit that Caitlin has arranged at St. Francis University.
St. Francis College. And we're also, I'm right here. Hello. Dear friends, right?
Yes, we are.
We are. We're also having an exhibit at Notre Dame Seminary. They've asked us to do a reading of poetry, a lecture on
wonderful.
aesthetics, particularly on the forgotten transcendental, as Etienne Gilson discusses. And she's going to have a semester-long exhibition there
Oh, lovely.
as well.
So when will that be?
This one we're looking at for spring of
Okay.
2024 for the local one at Notre Dame Seminary, and for the one in New York is going to be all of fall 2024.
Okay.
So we are got a packed schedule.
What's the projected release date of the book?
We're hoping for December.
Okay.
Fingers
Just in time
crossed.
for Christmas giving.
Exactly. Exactly. So.
And I'm very excited about the book.
Pardon?
I said I'm very excited about the book.
Well,
I never thought I would be a poet.
Well, just as she and I were discussing earlier, we never know what choices and circumstance lead us to. Sometimes beyond that which we can imagine.
And it goes back to that point of the great crossing of boundaries. So a lifelong artist and teacher helping to write poetry.
Yeah,
and,
it's beautiful.
Philosophy and theology entering into the thicket of poetry and novel.
And we started when she was in Italy.
Yeah, we started.
We were writing poetry by text.
By text.
Nice.
Too expensive to phone call. So
sure.
So
so sometimes we see benefits from modern technology. Well, for example, we can do podcasts, but also write poetry from one continent to another.
Exactly.
Just think what Dante could have done if he'd had
it. Exactly. Oh my word.
And it's fed the imagery in my art. You get excited about the possibilities of creation, and it feeds on itself.
Right.
She's come up with an image for Gaudi that she's painting next, which I'm excited about.
Wonderful.
The
Very
inner
nice.
part of the cathedral, where it intentionally looks like a crucifix, she's planning to paint that in her own
soon,
unrepeatable way.
Soon.
So
very nice. Very nice.
Trying to tell her to hurry up and then just on record so that I can get on one of the covers.
Do you have a web presence that people could visit to see some of your art?
carolscottart.com.
Okay, carolscottart.com, and I will have a link to that in my show notes as
and she's
well.
Got Instagram and Facebook, so I can send those to you.
Oh, okay. Also on social media, I will also have social media links, so let people pursue that.
Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like a wonderful project, and goes along well with what we were talking about earlier with breaking down these boundaries, with these different fields informing one another and making each other better, and prodding creativity that otherwise wouldn't be there without them. That you're, as Carol was talking about, with being inspired by the writing of the poetry in her art, and then vice versa as well.
She made me a better writer,
and she's made me a better artist.
Ah, very good. Do you have one more poem for us?
We do. I'm going to give you the joint. It's called Requiem, and this goes under the God section. So you've got one from the God, from me, and one from us together.
Okay.
If you dip your finger into the blood of my paint and further your reach behind my heart, then you would know with inborn light the slower requiem, the platonic form, hothouse strawberries overworking the vine. Dip your finger into the wine, into the wilderness of God's leaving, departing leaves from winter's tree. If you would dip my finger within the paint of your heart beyond all philosophy, then I would know every sense, sight overworking the vine, ungelded artifices of beauty, effortless rolling time. Artisan of unspent surrender, places change beauty, hemlocked lips, death will know everyone. No more philosophical meanderings into the dark as light of God, door opening, door closing, run wild, passions shot. Death will know everyone. called Requiem, one of ours.
Wonderful. And it
Thank
would
you.
not exist without the two of you together.
No, we did it together.
We
And
did.
sometimes we couldn't remember who said what.
We can't remember. I look at this and I don't know which line is which.
Well, that is true collaboration.
It's friendship, and that's another thing that I've learned, and will have to be a book way down the road. The lost beauty of friendship. Great philia, that wonderful sense of loving and caring for the other and wishing the other the deepest happiness.
It truly it is a topic, I think, a vitally important topic for us today, because I think we've so lost a sense of it because our society is so atomized and so much of it is electronic, and that especially I think a lot of young people have never learned really how to interact. And at the same time, older people too, and by older I mean people like me, who you see all of these surveys of particularly of men and how many friends they have, and they may have none, of people that they spend time with, and it's really a great loss. And I think that it has distorted even our lack of understanding of true friends, especially adult friends, has skewed our understanding of friendship in the past. That as we look back in history and we see people living out a friendship, we don't even know exactly how to process it, because they have a relationship that we've lost touch with. And I think it's important that we regain it, because it's so central to human flourishing, I think.
There's a passage from Thomas Traherne I'll send you. But he touches on that you have such a zeal for your own happiness, but in friendship, a true friendship, you find it exceeding for the other. And that's one of the things I've noticed with Carol. When I came back from Italy and the book was almost finished, she was so excited for me. There was tabbouleh out. There were biscuits with butter. There was a whole thing. It was going back
to the feast. It was a feast.
It was a feast, and I will say there were martinis too, very well made. But it was that joy she had, and the same thing with the art exhibit. It's being able to help set that up. There's absolutely no struggle for me. It's nothing but joy, because I'm excited for her.
And we've been having lots of fun.
Way too much fun. We have to stop writing poetry, basically. The
right. It's too the poetry is getting in the way of the other fun.
Yes,
but
it's getting in the way of life.
I think right. I think that the poetry itself seems like it's pretty fun too, though.
It is.
We've been having lots of fun. It's a true gift, and it's a big surprise to me in my life, because we're not of the same generation, and we're not of the same discipline.
As she says, she's not my run buddy.
So the name of the book.
College girlfriends.
Tell me again the name of the book. Remind everyone.
It's called Angular Decade, Rhapsody and Redolence, and the second part, Redolence, because of all.
Will also be out. Will it also be out from Cascade, who published
Cascade?
Okay.
Yes.
So the book we discussed earlier, As It Is in Heaven, already out. Came out last year. People can buy it. You're going to have a new version of that, though, at some point, maybe next year.
I'm hoping to have it wrapped up by January, so sometime in 2024.
Okay, as well as a novel on purgatory.
Yes.
Well, and it is my hope that you and I will revisit those sometime in 2024 to talk about that.
Alan, I'd be so delighted. This was a lot of fun. Absolutely.
I enjoyed very much speaking with you and getting to meet Carol, and you as well.
Thank you.
I feel like, Caitlin, I've gotten to know you through our correspondence over all of this time. But I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk, and I look forward to talking again. And Carol, you have beautiful art, and I look forward to seeing the book that you all done together, and encourage everyone to visit your website and social media, which will be linked in show notes.
And you will be invited to our gala in New York.
Oh, very nice.
Welcome.
I would love to be there. Well, thank you both very much, and we will talk again, I hope.
Thanks. God
Thank you.
bless. Thank you.
Thank you.